Code Pink's bi-weekly podcast of hot news out of the region. Today's episode, Elastic Borders, Hemispheric Militarization, and Gran America Norte. I was first introduced to the term elastic borders in the book Empire of Borders, written by today's guest, Todd Miller. And some of you may remember that WTF conversation. If not, I'll post it in the program notes. So let me introduce Todd to all of you. He is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Border Chronicle. Definitely we're subscribing to and reading regularly. He is based in Tucson, Arizona, and is the author of Border Patrol Nation, Storming the Wall, Empire of Borders, and Build Bridges, Not Walls. Plus, he also has a new book in the works. No title yet, it's a work in progress, so we'll update you on that when it's published. So welcome back, Todd. I'm so pleased that you had time for us today.
Oh, it's great to be here with you, Terry. Thanks for having me.
So let's start this conversation with what you are so good at, explaining and studying the intersection of U.S. militarization, migration, climate change, detention centers, surveillance equipment, AI, which I guess comes under militarization these days, on the U.S.-Mexico border, but it hasn't stayed there because your book, Empire of Borders, which introduced me to the phrase elastic borders, has really pretty much come true in this hemisphere, especially after Hegseth's declaration on Sunday of a Gran North America. So let's start with the militarization of the U.S.-Mexico border and then look at how it's expanded to the equator and perhaps farther.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when you think of the militarization of the U.S.-Mexico border, you can go back really decades. There's this great book by the sociologist Timothy Dunn. He writes, it's called The Militarization of the U.S.-Mexico Border, from 1978 to 1992. So that's it. We're talking the ideas of this sort of militarization. And the subtitle of Dunn's book is The Low Intensity Doctrine. And this people and Latin Americanists will be very familiar with this term. The low intensity doctrine comes home, right? So the whole thing that Dunn shows in that book is how the Pentagon's low intensity doctrine used in many places, specifically like the Central American wars in the 1980s and 70s, was then used as this sort of strategy behind the militarization of the U.S.-Mexico border, and which included the low intensity doctrine, of course, as a strategy, but also bringing in the equipment and different things that have been used that were used before in wars or by the military, and then repurposing those products or those items to be used on the U.S.-Mexico border. So there's this long history of that, but you can really see an acceleration of that over the years. I'm not going to go in the entire history of it, but there's some operations in the 90s that people probably are familiar with. The Operation Gatekeeper, for example, there are operations put forth by the Bill Clinton administration that really bolstered up the border apparatus in urban areas, and the whole point of that was this new deterrence strategy by building up the infrastructure, the enforcement infrastructure in places like Nogales and San Diego and Brownsville and El Paso, that people would then be forced to circumvent those areas and go into like the Arizona Sonoran Desert, and which the idea behind the deterrence was that they would not be able to carry enough food or water or be able to serve. I mean, it would be a potentially deadly trek to go into these areas, and that the word would get back to other people wishing to cross into the United States, and thus prevention through deterrence. So this whole idea of prevention through deterrence and these first Operation Gatekeeper, Operation Safeguard, Operation Hold the Line, they all brought like tons of extra money into this, and you can really see a pretty massive buildup in terms of walls. Like the first walls, they had a chain link fence before that, but they took out the chain link fence and put like a wall structure in the cities and the urban areas. And they call the Border Patrol called it a three-prong system. Put in the walls, put agents right on the line, and then have them reinforced with technology like surveillance cameras. Um, and from that point on, this is how the U.S. Mexico border has grown into the massive apparatus that it is today. It's based on this deterrence strategy. It's based on putting all this infrastructure within the cities. And it becomes increasingly more sophisticated. It's increasingly using military surplus. It's increasingly using surveillance that is first tested in warfare and then brought back to the border. It's increasingly using Israeli technology, the sorts of surveillance equipment and drone systems that are used in Gaza, for example. Um, it's also when you talk, for my book Empire of Borders, I was able to go and speak with some startup companies in Tel Aviv who talked about how not only is there a war going on in different places like Gaza, for example, but it's also a proving ground to test
Yeah.
different technologies, and if those technologies are approved, they get the combat approved stamp on them, and then they're able to be sold all around the world. And so you have this kind of combination of all these things. Of course, I should mention that the implementation of the Department of Homeland Security and after 9/11 attacks, really it really brought in a lot of floods, fire hose of budgets, right?
Mhm.
You can just go take a gander at DHS budgets. Of course, Department of Homeland Security seems like it's been around forever. ICE, which is a product of the Department of Homeland Security, its implementation in 2003, seems like it's been around for a long time. Really, it hasn't. It's been around since 2003. And what happened with the implementation of Department of Homeland Security, a counter-terror priority mission was placed upon the border enforcement and immigration enforcement. And what happened in the subsequent years is no such quote unquote terrorists crossed the border ever, or weapons of mass destruction. That was another part of it. But that sort of language brought in just tons more budget. And the budgets,
Terrorist label is being used for like everything today for US
yeah, it's,
interventionism. Yeah. All types of
I
interventionism, not just military.
yeah, that's so true. And every time I hear it, I just think back to the early 2000s and this that build up to the Department of Homeland Security, how the sort of mantra, almost the constant repetition of terrorism or terrorist, and how that would automatically just bring lots of resources to whatever you were talking about. And definitely was the case with the border. And you can see whatever, like the militarization that Dunn wrote about in that first book from 78 to 92 was just on it. It just started accelerating with all these different projects that were happening. There's like a couple of them are like the Secure Fence Act of 2006. Why is that important? Well, 650 miles of walls and barriers were built with that. So when you think about the walls on the border, the first thing I think about probably is that one because that's the most massive project of wall building that we've seen. I mean, Trump took the torch, took the baton, I guess is the word, in 2017 and continued. But those sorts of big projects were happening. There's another one called SBI Net, which brought in like the most. They were trying to create a virtual wall, so like a surveillance sort of wall based on, and this is where we're getting at the kind of expansion of the border into other places and both into the interior and exterior. But this idea of a layered border, right? And you can really see that that's we can say elastic, right? Because it really is. Um, but the terminology used by Border Patrol in their strategy papers is layered. They call it a layered border. So the actual international boundary line is but one layer of this multi-layered border, and you can look at it going into the interior. I mean, to me, when I see Minneapolis operations, when I see Chicago operations or Charlotte, I automatically think of this sort of layered border that's been going into the interior of the United States for a long time. And the sort of virtual wall, uh, the that was being implemented in the early 2000s with the post 9/11, that was going into what would be called a 100-mile jurisdiction of
Right.
the border.
So
And that
that's
100
like
mile,
100 miles from every border. So like if you lived in San Francisco, 100 miles inland from there. If
yeah,
you live in Tucson, it's 100
yeah,
miles. Yeah, okay. I'm not
yeah.
sure how many people are aware of that. Yeah, so
More
that's
people
that's
should
the
be aware of it.
jurisdiction of Customs and Border Patrol all the way 100 miles, the whole
Yes.
perimeter of the United States.
It is, and that's
Yeah,
200 million people.
yeah.
So this, like you mentioned, the city of San Francisco is in it. The city of Portland is in it. The
Mhm.
city of Los Angeles is in it. The city of New York is in it. The city of Washington, D.C. is in it. So the whole state of Florida is in it. The
Yeah.
whole state of Maine is in it.
Mhm.
Most of the
Yeah.
state of Michigan is in it. It's so like when we see these operations that are going those operations that I'm sure everyone's quite well aware of. I automatically, that's the first thing I think of is this idea that Border Patrol can, ICE operates, of course, in the interior. These operations are joint patrols with Border Patrol and ICE, and they they're operating in these 100-mile jurisdictions, but also I think they're honestly, and this is another subject for another day, maybe, but they're going past them. Like they're breaking that rule of the 100-mile zone that covers again 200 million people, many of the major cities. And like Minneapolis is 300 miles from the border. So I think that's worthy of anyone who has any sort of like journalists out there, like maybe I've definitely want to look into this myself, but that sort of breaking of the 100-mile jurisdiction into cities further inland is definitely happening. And that's definitely been a part of this border strategy, the militarization of the border. Like for example, Chicago, the Midway Blitz that happened the end of last year. There was one incident where Border Patrol rappelled out of a helicopter into an apartment building in downtown, well, I think it was in downtown Chicago. And so they're using the sort of militarized techniques that you see
For sure.
they're commonplace on the border in a way, like we're kind of used to that, though even as dramatic as the rappelling out of a helicopter is. But now into the city where you have this like militarization going into, like all of a sudden, like in Midtown Chicago, right?
And
Or
that's like that's like a total military intervention, like something you'd see outside US borders. Like, yeah.
it
I
really,
mean,
it
so these are
really,
like completely battlefield tested techniques and technology.
precisely. It's really, this is what it is. It's coming from this militarized border where like Border Patrol's trained in all this stuff, and they're trained in, they call themselves. They say they're a paramilitary unit, and the paramilitary, by the way, not in the sense of, the Latin American paramilitaries that you'll see in different conflict areas, but more like paramilitary in the sense of a hybrid
Yeah.
state, police, military unit. Like the idea that the military is infused in this police unit is very much a part of the thinking of Border Patrol, and I would say ICE as well. ICE, they both fall into this sort of rubric. Yeah, so that's basically, you see this coming out of these last few decades, particularly accelerated in the post 9/11 era, particularly well resourced. It was so funny to me, Terry, like last year hearing or the years before Trump took this Trump 2.0 um, that they would say, like, you'd hear the Border Patrol agents saying, "Oh no," or the head people at Border Patrol saying, "Oh, we're out of money or we don't have enough resources," and that's quickly rebutted by just simply looking at their budgets and looking at the massive amounts of money that's been given to these different agencies, and then along those lines of rappelling into buildings and dramatic, the recruitment videos are pretty much that. If you go and see a recruitment video for the Border Patrol, you might as well think you're going into a war zone somewhere because that's definitely what you see. You see the
Yeah.
helicopters and agents and the sort of language. We're on the front lines. Um, and especially right after 9/11, it was the front lines of terror, like the whole idea of the global war on terror being the actual U.S. southern border being the front line of the global war on terror was very much in the narrative and the rhetoric and justifying, of course, these bigger and bigger budgets.
And the focus has been on the southern border. Why not the northern border?
The northern border of the U.S.
Yeah.
The thing is they have like in the after 9/11, before 9/11, the northern border actually did get very little attention, and then it really did shift with after 9/11, especially if you look at the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act has some stipulations about a percentage of money that needed to go to the northern border. And there was a pretty dramatic shift, comparatively speaking, always more money and more resources going to the southern border. But that the northern border would, the thing, because I did some reporting on it for my first book, Border Patrol Nation, where went up to the Buffalo sector and the Detroit sector. And what I found was that Border Patrol was less like they said like in Western New York, they I went to Rochester. They put in a new Border Patrol station in Rochester. Like, why the Border Patrol station in Rochester? Well, there's a ferry system that's coming from Toronto, and we have to guard the shores of Lake Ontario. I'm like, okay, okay. So I go, I'm gonna go out to Lake Ontario and see if you guys are out there. And I go out along, don't see any Border Patrol, of course. But what turns out that they're doing more is going after farm workers, like farm workers that were like, I went to this place where they had apple orchards, and there were a lot of undocumented farm workers who would come in and harvest the harvest season. And then the New York State Police, who was getting money from Department of Homeland Security, would set up checkpoints like right in front of a laundromat on a Sunday and then have a border patrol with them in the same exact place. So if they stopped somebody and they didn't have a driver's license or they didn't have correct identification, they would then put them over to Border Patrol, and then Border Patrol would most likely arrest them or put them in, send them to detention, or they go through a deportation process. So that's what I've seen on the northern border, and I'm pretty sure it still stays the same.
But, okay, but not as heavily militarized and secured as the southern border. And I mean, I probably shouldn't say it, but there seems to be like a certain degree of racism attached to
Oh
which
yeah.
border gets. There's really no other way to, discreetly say
Well,
that. It's pretty overt, I think. That's true.
there's this one. Can I tell you about one report that I
Of
saw on the
course,
northern
yeah.
border? There's one on the trains, and is this on the northern border? But the Amtrak and Greyhound buses. So Border Patrol would go in the stations, and they get on the Amtrak trains and they get on the Greyhound buses, and they would then like go and ask people for identification, but they were clearly racially
Yeah.
profiling. And then even more so, they documented the skin complexion
Oh,
of the very people that they would take off the buses, right? And of course, you know, this when and it was leaked, the information about what they were like, the kind of the records they were keeping as far as skin complexion, but the sort of blatant racism it's definitely like what you say. The focus goes on the southern border and this idea that Latin America or anyone people are coming up from the southern border. But the idea that on the northern border that they're still doing it. It's just a different way, right? They're still using a sort of racially profiling technique. It's just done in a completely different way.
a little softer way, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
So earlier you mentioned Department of Homeland Security, ICE, Customs and Border Patrol, and how they all basically are intertwined or work together as a team. And all of those organizations now sit under this joint task force that's managed by the U.S. Northern Command. So, I mean, that's about, it doesn't get any more militarily explicit than that to me. These are civilian, domestic organizations now working under U.S. Northern Command, which when I asked you to do this interview, I said, that's so much like your book, Empire of Borders, and this whole concept that you exposed me to of the elasticity of borders. So now we have these domestic organizations, part of the US military, which is responsible for what? From Greenland to the equator. So let's talk about that expansion, that elasticity of the US border in relationship to what Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War Hegseth announced on Sunday to be Greater North America.
Yeah, I mean, you can argue that they've been waiting to make that announcement now for a long time,
Yeah,
right?
years, yeah.
Yeah,
In my
years.
opinion, yes. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Um,
This isn't
yeah, I
unique
mean,
to Trump. It's been coming.
it's
Yeah.
been coming. Yeah, it's been really since again, it's a post 9/11 phenomenon or dynamic, right? I would actually argue there's two super important dynamics about the border. One is the deterrent strategy that we just discussed on the actual border and forcing people into like pretty desolate places. The second is this externalization of the border, of pushing out the border. I'm using the terms, the elasticity of the border, how it extends deep in way past the actual U.S. Mexico border. And you remember what's his name? John Kelly, the
Oh, yeah.
first Secretary of Homeland
Yes.
Security.
Yeah.
Of course, he came right out of the Southern Command, right? He was the
Yes.
Southern
Yeah.
Command. He was the commander or whatever they call it there of the Southern Command, and he one of those. It struck me because when he was doing his confirmation hearing, one of the first things he said was that that the U.S. border, we should have the U.S. border needs to begin. I think he said 2,500 miles away from the actual border. And then he used a kind of football metaphor, and he said you can't treat the border itself like it was a goal line stand. You have to, in other words, you have to like extend the border as far as possible. And then he used Peru. He said like Peru. He used that as an example in his quote. So that whole idea of this expansion of the border to go in that it's been going on for a long time, really in a more concerted way, in a strategic way, I would argue, since 9/11. It's for the announcements to be made like last Sunday, um, by the Department of War. right?
Yeah, yes. Well,
Is oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Simulation of this sort of exertion of it's so funny because the border itself, you hear how it's justified here. Oh, it's sovereignty. We're protecting our national sovereignty. And then if you really study the border, you'll see that it's violating other countries' national sovereignty constantly,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so for years and years, Border Patrol has been going to other countries and training people. Uh, Border Patrol's been sending, or CBP and Department of Homeland Security and the Pentagon have been sending equipment to other countries for their sort of border control uh, um, things that they're doing. And those countries you can go down and down. I mean, the southern border with Mexico and Guatemala is one of the hot truly it's one of the big hot spots. I'm actually of the opinion that to actually understand what's happening on the border today, and especially in terms of lower crossings, like the you hear a lot about less people crossing the border.
yeah.
You got to go and look at that border. It's a part of the U.S. border. Alan Burson, who was a big DHS CBP guy, he's a commissioner of CBP. In 2012, he actually said the southern border of the United States is not its actual southern boundary with Mexico. It's the border between Chiapas and Guatemala. And he said that straight out. I mean, we all knew that was true,
Right.
but for him to say that as an official explicitly, I'm so happy because I have that quote to grab onto anytime I need to say it. It's really true. This is really what's happening. And that's what's been happening. What Burson said, and you can make the case that it goes way further than the Mexico-Guatemala border now. The sort of programs that the United States has and helping develop other countries' border patrols, and that's done with CBP and DHS, but it's also done with the commands, primarily once you get down in the South America and Central America with Southern Command, right? But also Northern Command and the U.S. military. Um, yeah, so speaking of that, I have military jets flying over my head, as if in queue, right? But yeah, so that sort of announcement uh comes with that history, but it's not surprising to me that given the sorts of ways that the Trump administration is pushing the envelope that we're seeing in his first year and as we go into the second year, it's not surprising that that part of it will also get accelerated in ways that should alarm everyone.
So, oh gosh, I'm thinking about 100 things simultaneously now about what just, again, for the audience, it really is important to understand that what was declared on Sunday, this was the 29th, is not new. It's been, and I'm pleased that you know brought this. It's not anything new. It's been coming. It's one of those consistencies of administration to administration. I mean, you don't just unveil this new zone of security on Sunday because you have a new president. I mean, this is infrastructure that's been put in place, you know, since 9/11 and even sooner. It's just now it's been unveiled, and a lot has been unveiled, which perhaps is good for those of us who are U.S. citizens. And it's like it's masks off. There's no more masking or hiding behind the curtain about what U.S. foreign and economic policy really is. It's very harsh, whether you physically see it or not. It's very brutal. So in our last few minutes, let's talk about this elastic border, this expansion. Now, basically, the U.S. border, it goes from Greenland, the Arctic Circle, to the equator, and includes every country in that zone. Everything. Everything maybe except, well, I don't know where Nicaragua falls right now. and we can see what's happening, the aggressiveness towards Cuba. And of course, they are, you know, in that new zone of security, as Hegseth describes it, Gran America. So what is the goal? Is it to is it war with China? Is it to expand US borders and just make it greater US, like we're seeing greater Israel in the Middle East? Is it about natural resources? All of the above. What is it, in your opinion, that we're witnessing?
I know as far as the border expansion, they always they I mean from their point of view or the official point of view, they always say, "Oh, we're trying to extend our border and stop people from coming to the US borders long before they get there." So I know that's the official reasoning. The reasoning I like, especially from writing Empire of Borders, and in the Empire of Borders, I looked at, this expansion, which goes beyond the Gran America, that's being promoted by right now, into like the broader, like I went to the Jordan-Syrian border, for example, and I spent time in the Philippines, and um and I was following money going out of Washington to everywhere. And it's definitely concentrated in this more geographical region around the United States. But I can't help to think, every time something like this happens, in that, just like you were mentioning earlier, Terry, about I don't think you can just take U.S. foreign policy, for foreign and economic and military policy, out of the equation, when you're looking at these things, because and the sort of misery that those policies have brought around the world to different places. And in those policies, we have to include, mass fossil fuel consumption, that where you have the United States as the historic leader in the greenhouse gas emissions. So the historic responsibility falls on the United States for the sorts of things we're seeing around climate, and especially situations where people can't even return to their homes, like the
Yeah.
desertification and sea level rise and that sort of thing. In other words, I think like when you see hear these grand plans, and you think of like these how this sort of United States tentacles as they're going all around the world. I can't I think of like sort of scaffolding of the status quo, like the knowledge that we're in a very unsustainable world in terms and economic terms, where more, you have so many people, so much inequality, so many people living barely making ends meet. Um, and so many like super rich, or if so few, so many who are having trouble making ends meet, and then so few super rich, and and you have like the sort of those sorts of just that sort of distress, and then you have this climate era that's really just coming upon us so quickly now, that there's just no way, like the sort of displacement that it's going to cause is pretty well known. Like the people are prognosticating this stuff, knowing that more and more people are going to be on the move. And there's nothing worse than being in economic distress and getting nailed with a climate thing all at the same time, right? And so the way to keep like the world as it is, business as usual. The people who are getting rich get richer, right? The poor stay poor. The way to keep it is through different variations of militarization. And the one that we know a lot about is war, right? Because that will get a lot of press. The one that we know less about is this border stuff and
Right.
this expansion of the border. But I think it needs to be thought of as a declaration of war, because it's the declaration of a war zone, and a war zone without an end, right? So you say you have a
Right.
border, then you can bring in the military or whatever, the hybrid military force, and then they operate in these like places that no one, where people end up circumventing areas to go into really desolate places. So this war plays out, is invisibilized, right? You don't even see it, yet it's happening, and it serves as this like, yeah, like a scaffolding, like a thing that makes sure everything stays in place, like everyone's kept in line, that there can't be this huge challenge to the state of things. That's my interpretation of
Mhm.
this. Um, yeah. So.
And it is formal U.S. military policy, is it not? That climate change and mass migration related to it is formal military policy in the U.S. for
It,
quite some time now.
yeah, they have migration and instability. Like every time you read a Pentagon archive paper or their strategy that will bring in climate change, and there's a lot of it, intrinsically linked with instability. So the idea if people are migrating, it's going to audit. That's what it brings, instability. There's not like,
Right.
oh, you're coming from Oaxaca, you're going to bring this
No.
great, vibrant, way of seeing things and traditions and culture that you have in Oaxaca. It's more that your instability and a cause of you're a cause of instability, and thus, the solution to you is to be a military solution, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's yeah, and then you look in the climate change, that's what it is. It's like when you look at those archives, it's not even the climate event that seems to distress the military practitioners. It's more what are people going to do
Yeah.
because of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The desperation
Yeah.
and the numbers. So, well, Todd, we've got so much more to talk about. We're going to have you come back.
Yeah, sure. Anytime. Anytime.
Especially when your new book comes out. We'll have to talk about that. But I really want to share with the audience, for me, I mean, you're a prolific author, and your studies and your themes are so important to study and understand. For me, Storming the Wall, which is a great title, like storming, like a siege of people storming the wall versus, and also like weather storming the wall, climate storming the wall. It's a great title, and it really is so educational on weaving all of this together. But all your books do that. So I'm going to list them all in the program description for the audience, and we look forward to your next publication. And so thank you so much, Todd Miller of the Border Chronicle, and I'll put that link in the program notes too, because the audience really, you should follow that regularly. So, okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Todd. Until the next time, and for the
Thank
audience,
you.
we'll see you everybody in 2 weeks. Thanks again. So happy you had time for us.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.